Hello, Christine Faulkner with Cava and Faulkner, living trust lawyer in Elk Grove, Sacramento, estate attorney. Thanks so much for tuning into another edition of The Daily with Christine. Today we're going to talk about what happens when you pass away, if you have a trust, and what happens when there's not a whole lot of money or liquidity in your accounts, depending on what you have going into the trust. It's not always just what goes into the trust, but there is always that question when you pass away. Who is going to pay for your final expenses? Who is going to, where's the money going to come from to cover taxes, that sort of thing? So if you've ever wondered, how does this happen? What and who would cover those expenses? This video is for you. So let's talk about what happens if you don't have any kind of planning at all and you pass away. So if you have no plan at all, the minute your bank account, the bank finds out that you have passed away, and many people don't know, family, close relatives, let the financial institutions know that you have passed, they will immediately freeze your bank accounts. So what does that mean for family? It means that if you don't have a joint account with a spouse, or you're single, or maybe you have your own account and all of your money is kept in separate accounts, it means that family has no access to your funds to pay for those final expenses, to pay your creditors, if there are any hospital expenses. It means that your family and or friends are going to have to dig into their own pockets, their own bank accounts to cover those expenses, and hope at some point in the future that they will get reimbursed. So it's always difficult in those circumstances when people are grieving the loss of a loved one, and on top of it, they realize they have to actually use their own funds to fund perhaps a burial or the services, and to continue paying the bills. And if there are some big creditors, like, for example, medical bills, which is not uncommon, then they have to come up with the money to do that, especially if you don't have any kind of plan in place and your accounts end up being probated or they're locked down for a period of time. Even if you don't have enough money or assets that would qualify you for a probate, which is $166,000, you still have to wait 40 days after a person passes away to file what's called a small estate affidavit, which is usually going to be an affidavit by your executor if you have a will. Hopefully you at least have a will, because that makes things a lot easier for someone to act. An executor will complete an affidavit essentially saying, there is no probate going on. There's not enough assets for that, and I am the person who has the right to obtain these funds as a fiduciary. So they do have to make a statement under penalty of perjury. They have to wait a specified time frame, and it can really put a burden on the family. So that's something to think about. If you are ever in that situation where you are having to take care of someone else's expenses after they pass away, it can be quite difficult because maybe you don't have the funds, or you prefer not to have to take money out of accounts that you've worked hard for to accumulate and wait for a year or 2 or 6 months to get paid back. Nobody wants to be in that position. So that is a reality when there is not a lot of liquidity in the bank accounts or other assets available to pay for those final expenses. And so one of the things that people can do is they can prepay for their final, like for a burial or cremation and for their services, so that the family or loved ones are not burdened with having to dig into their own pockets to do that. Of course, that doesn't take care of other creditors, but it certainly takes care of that final expenses, the final expenses. So you might want to look into that. If you have a trust, then it's a little bit different. There will be a trust administration, but again, there is that time frame when if you let the financial institutions know that the grantor of the trust has passed away, basically the person who created the trust. The accounts are going to be, you won't have access to them unless they were properly put into the trust. Hopefully they were, but there still will be a time frame that you'll have to wait, because you will have to wait for the death certificate. That takes a little bit of time. And you will also have to get a new certification of trust with potentially a tax ID to open an administrative trust and then gain control of that trust account yourself as the successor. So all of that takes a little bit of time. Certainly with COVID, it's taking a little bit longer to get death certificates from the Department of Vital Records. So there can be a time frame where folks are having to front money. And so again, if you've taken the time to prepay for at least, funeral arrangements or cremation, that means that the funds are already there to pay for those immediate expenses. But it can be difficult even with a trust when there's not enough liquidity and the grantor passes away and there's just not a lot of cash to pay for things. Sometimes folks are on a very, limited, they have a very limited income. They have Social Security and not a whole lot more coming in. And so there's not a lot of money coming into those accounts to begin with. The grantor is living on a very fixed income for sure. And of course, once they pass away, the income, the Social Security stops. And so there's no more income coming into the accounts. And that means, once again, if you're the successor trustee and you have bank accounts or liquidity that's worth a couple of $1,000s, it's probably not going to get you very far, especially if there are creditors that have to be paid, like credit cards, hospital bills, that kind of thing. And it can once again leave the trustee in the situation of having to figure out, well, where does the money come from to pay these expenses? Now, creditors, once a person passes away, can certainly be kind of put on hold until there is liquidity in the trust to, if assets are sold or liquidated, to be able to pay creditors or negotiate with creditors. So that's one thing, but it can be quite overwhelming if you are the successor trustee and you are fronting money out of your own savings, your own assets to pay for, final expenses for the grantor and other creditors, without having the liquidity to basically do something about it pretty quickly. And of course, there are always final taxes that have to be paid as well, which doesn't come until the next year, which is great, but that is always looming on the horizon as well. Where is the money going to come from so that you can pay that final tax return for the grantor of the trust and any other taxes that might be owed, not just income taxes, but if there are capital gains, whatever is going on. So thinking about that as a grantor or just as a person, being mindful of maybe not saddling other folks with at least your final expenses and having a plan in place to have that taken care of, so that people are not having to come up with $10,000 or $15,000 or even $5,000 to pay for that, is such a gift to the people who come after you, to your loved ones and your beneficiaries who are already going to be grieving, but also being aware of just how much money you do have and giving some intention and thought toward putting yourself in that position. How would that feel if that were you? Having to cover the expenses of someone else's estate or trust until assets could be sold. Are you really in a position to do that? And if you're not, then probably there are many other people who are not either. And so giving some thought to how you can create more liquidity, perhaps through insurance. That's always a way that you can create liquidity at not a lot of cost. Life insurance, term life insurance, can create some nice liquidity for your trustee to be able to pay all of the expenses associated with your trust or your estate, whatever that may be, and to pay creditors without having to dig into their own pockets at all. So just a little, food for thought. I know nobody wants to think about passing away, and you're like everybody else. It's probably not something that you like to think about often, but I do think it's worthy of consideration. The impact of the decisions that you make now has on other people later after you do pass away, and what you really want to happen. So thanks again for tuning in to another edition of The Daily with Christine. Subscribe to our channel, like our content, and let me know what you'd like to hear about. If you know that you need to do some estate planning and you've been putting it off, we're absolutely here to help. I know that we can help you put a very comprehensive plan in place that will protect the people that you love the most in your life, which with a custom plan that meets all of your needs and the needs of your loved ones. So thanks again. See you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.